Hello again, this is Bionic Slime. I'm your online voice for reviews of your choice. Instead of doing my usual BS reviews or my video rants, I decided to do something a little bit more different. It's something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while now, and something that I'm extremely passionate about in real life, and that is the topic of villains. I always find that villains in any story are actually the most fascinating characters of the whole mix. You can have tons of stories in movies and shows that have happy characters that are troubled only by internal conflicts or antagonists like rivalry or assholes living next door that cause them problems, but I find it's a villain who always makes things most interesting. A true and through evil, heartless, bastard, troublemaking villain. Because without the villains, heroes would all live a happy little lives, and we wouldn't have much conflict except for internal. And while that can be good sometimes, I feel villains bring the most interesting things out when they join the mix. I find them fascinating, and also it's also more interesting to figure out the motivation of a villain. When a hero dedicates himself to a heroic cause, it's more commended than questioned, whereas villains, we always wonder, why do they fall from grace? Why do they turn into the monsters that they became, and why are they doing these horrible acts? So that's another reason I find them interesting. This top 12 list it's also a reason it's at 12 is because of 4 different reasons. Number 1, the top 10 list has been so overdone, so I wanted something a little bit different. Number 2, 12 is my lucky number and my personal favorite number, if that makes any sense. 3, I have a hard enough time picking the 12 villains because I like a little bit of everything. I see the good in everything, or at least I try to, and that makes my decision making a little bit more harder because there's so many different villains I like that I couldn't put on this list that unfortunately I had to narrow it down to just these 12. So 10 was out of the question. 12 was the best I could do. And finally, reason number 4, as a nostalgia critic says, instead of him doing top 10, he does top 11 because he says he likes to go one step ahead of people. Well, in honor of that, I'm going 2 steps ahead of people and doing top 12. Before I begin, I want to make something very clear, and it's important that you guys understand this while seeing this review. This is not, I repeat, not a list of who I think the best villains are. This is a list of my top personal favorite villains for my own personal reasons. It doesn't matter how long the villain's been on screen, if he or she had limited airtime, or they weren't as destructive, weren't as evil as this guy, or they're not as famous. That's irrelevant. These villains are my favorite for my own personal reasons, and a villain does not have to be on screen or on show for 2.5 hours to make an impact in a person's life. I love these villains for who they are, not for how long they were on camera, or comic book, or whatever. That's another thing to remember. This list encompasses a wide variety of sources, from animes, cartoons, movies, comic books, etc. So, let's get cracking. Starting at the bottom of the list is number 12, Claudia the Cat Girl from the anime Fighting Foodons. If you're looking at this pink pussy cat and wondering who the hell she is, you're not alone. Claudia comes from a relatively unknown anime, Fighting Foodons, which is made in the same vein and style as Pokemon and Digimon. The story takes place about a bunch of kids who battle against an evil empire led by the head villain King Gorge, who battles with people using magical cards that turns food dishes such as spaghetti or pizza into monsters that can actually physically fight one another. Claudia is the head henchwoman of King Gorge, and she basically serves the same purpose as Team Rocket, trying to stop the kids and the main characters, but failing horribly at her job. As I said, Claudia sucks as a villain. She's completely inept, she's clumsy, she's stupid, she's incompetent, she's over-egotistical, and she cracks very easily under the smallest ounce of pressure. But through it all, she remains vigilant and constant in her mission. That's one of the things I find most adorable about her. Despite the fact that she's completely inept at what she's doing, she still tries very hard and is very dedicated to her evil career. I love the fact that she never gives up no matter how bad things get for her, and they get bad for her quite easily. And that, in a sense, creates a sense of favoritism for her, in the sense that you see her go through so much shit, you almost want her to see her succeed just so she can say, I did something right for once. I also think she has a quite adorable voice. I think she's smoking hot for a cat girl. And I just think she was a very fun character. And I think even though the Fighting Foodons is a relatively unknown anime, Claudia was the best villain for that show, even though she was not the head villain. I think people really need to take a closer look at her. She may be a human girl who's turned into a cat girl by a magic spell, but she left quite an impact on my personal interest. Going in at number 11 is Machine Dramon from Digimon Digital Monsters. Basically, Machine Dramon is a Godzilla-sized robot who acts very much like the Terminator on steroids, and he looks like it too. Machine Dramon was the third Dark Master, the last of a group of 4 villains who served at the end of the Digimon saga in Season 1. Machine Dramon is also famous for having the relatively shortest amount of time on screen. All the other Dark Masters had at least 3 or 4 episodes to commit their evil acts, whereas Machine Dramon was limited to only 2. Despite that, I actually love this guy beyond all belief, and thought he was the coolest and baddest ass of the Dark Masters. For one thing, he's definitely the biggest. He's armed to the teeth with so many freaking cool ballistic weapons, and he's got the coolest, darkest voice. It sounds something like this. And what I love best about Machine Dramon is that not only had he a truly great, terrifying mechanical appearance, I think machine villains have unique appearances, but he didn't dick around. Unlike the other Dark Masters and most villains, he did not waste time boasting about his enormous ego or talking shit. He tried his best and quickest to kill the Digidestined as quickly as possible, and for that I commend him because he didn't waste around. Most villains get destroyed because of their boasting and gloating, and it ended up backfiring them. Even though Machine Dramon did get killed in this sense, I still commend him for doing that. Now, going at number 10, we have Jafar from the Disney's Aladdin movies. At first, I didn't like Jafar. I didn't think he was that great of a villain or with anything special compared to other villains that I favor on this list. However, as I watched Aladdin when I was much older and got a better perspective on him, I realized the true greatness that is Jafar. Jafar is a twisted, bizarre little man who was very cunning and very swift, and at the same time very twisted and maniacal. He had these great mood swings from going to genius to just gonzo in like seconds. And even though he didn't really have any powers, he still remained a cunning threat. And he was even more of a badass when he got his magical powers. Sure, he was loaded with bad puns, but he's also loaded with badass spells. And he proved to be too powerful a threat for Aladdin to defeat on his own. He had to trick him. He couldn't outpower him. And that's one of the things I like about Jafar, is that he had such power, and he was so in love with it, that he just made himself so much more easier to watch. And I think his genie form just looks great, but I particularly favor his Cobra form above all else. Not to mention Jafar's got such a great voice. I could watch him for hours on end if they use him in more movies. Coming in at number 9 is Agent Smith from the Matrix movies. Hugo Weaving shines brilliantly as this soulless, seemingly emotionless robot clone machine who proved to be the true star gem of all the Matrix films. Say what you want about Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions, but I believe those movies were absolutely worth it just enough to see Agent Smith kick some ass. I'm glad he took a much more active role, and I love the fact that he has such power, and he has such a cool, composed demeanor. His looks, his appearance, his voice. He gave it such a raw, amazing performance that I absolutely adored by Hugo Weaving, and I loved Agent Smith. I loved every scene he was in. I cheered every scene he was in because he proved to be an awesome threat and an awesome arch nemesis for Neo. I mean, he really just did a great job fighting against him, and I just loved their interactions, their quips, calling him Mr. Anderson and Smith. I just thought they were great together, and I loved seeing them fight. They were true eternal enemies, and I was so happy that Smith's role got expanded in the other Matrix movies. Number 8 is the Shredder from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The greatest thing about Shredder is that he mixes practicality with awesomeness. He looks and acts like some kind of disgruntled samurai warrior, and he wears and fights like a human blender. The Shredder has such a very terrifying appearance, and the fact that he's covered from head to toe with blades just makes him look that much cooler. And I think the fact that Shredder has such a passion and hatred for the Turtles makes him much more interesting because, for the one thing, the Turtles are mutants. He's an ordinary human being, yet he still managed to maintain a constant threat against the Turtles. I love the fact that he kept appearing on the movies. I know the Turtles have other enemies, but for the majority of the films, Shredder was always coming up. And with any other villain, it probably wouldn't have worked. But Shredder had the standing prowess to keep you interested as he was on screen. And I realized the 80s cartoon version of him was a bit silly, but if you watch the original live film of Shredder, you can see that Shredder is definitely worth your attention and your praise as a badass villain. Coming in at number 7 is Davy Jones from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. This walking stack of whale barf ended up to be the real shining villain out of the franchise. While we had an awesome performance already from Captain Barbossa in the first film, Davy Jones ended up stealing the story and the scenes with his unique appearance, unique personality, and awesome voice acting and physical acting from Bill Nye, no, not the science guy. Davy Jones was cruel, barbaric, twisted, and outright heartless, and it made him such a fascinating character, not his awesome, badass, unique-looking appearance notwithstanding. And you just just love to see more of him because he proved to be so creepy and terrifying and yet so barbaric at the same time. I loved all of his scenes and wish he could have gotten more. He had such a compelling backstory with this whole love story with Calypso, and his interactions with Jack Sparrow were just as fun and enjoyable. And I think Davy Jones is one of the best live Disney villains they've ever created. I loved everything about him. I think his design and appearance is so unique, and I just think he's such an excellent villain that truly deserves attention and notice. I'm taking a break here. Stay tuned for part 2 of my villains list.